Hello and welcome to the Ride Around the Murray Festival 2021 program, Reshaped for Online Presentation. My name's Anne-Marie, WAM Festival Director, and I'm talking to you from the Albury Library Museum here on Wiradjuri country, where we pay respect to Wiradjuri elders past, present and emerging. For they are the traditional custodians of this land and hold the memories, culture, traditions and hopes of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that contribute to our community. A big thank you to all of you who are tuned in, including those of you watching this as a replay later. We truly appreciate your support of the Ride Around the Murray Festival and of literature and storytelling and the arts more broadly. We're thrilled to be able to present this session, Creating Captivating Children's Books, with Ursula Dubusaski, Sophie Laguna, Leigh Hobbs and moderator Lisa Walker. Thanks to all of them for making the transition and coming online with us. It's my pleasure to introduce Lisa Walker, who will introduce the rest of the panel. Lisa is a writer of fiction for adults and young adults. She has a background in environmental communication and a PhD in creative writing. Her novels include Melt, Paris Syndrome, Sex, Lies and Bonsai, among others. And her most recent young adult novel, just released last month, is Trouble Is My Business. It's the second in the humorous Olivia Grace teen detective series, and I can vouch it's a joy to read, no matter what your age. Great to have you with us, Lisa.
Thanks so much, Anne-Marie. Thanks for that lovely introduction.
Great to have you with us. Before I hand over to Lisa to introduce the panel, I'll just remind listeners that you will be able to type your questions for the panel at any time using the chat bar on the right side of your screen, as long as you're logged into Google. And Lisa will come to your questions toward the end of the session. So enjoy this session, everyone, and over to you, Lisa.
Thank you. Welcome everyone to what's going to be a wonderful panel on creating captivating children's books with the wonderful Ursula Dubusaski, Leigh Hobbs and Sophie Laguna, who I'd like to welcome in now. Hi Leigh, hi Ursula, hi Sophie.
Hello. Hi.
So I'd just like to introduce you all to the audience. Ursula Dubusaski was born and lives in Sydney. She wanted to be a writer from the age of 6 and is now the author of over 60 books for children and young adults. She's won several national prizes and has been nominated internationally for the Hans Andersen and Astrid Lindgren Awards. Ursula is the current Australian Children's Laureate. Her latest books are Pierre's Not There and March of the Ants. And a perhaps lesser known fact about Ursula is that she was named after the character of Ursula Brangwyn in the 1915 novel, The Rainbow by D.H. Lawrence. You must have come from quite a literary family, Ursula.
Yes, so look, they would always say, though, my parents, we didn't name you after her, but we got the idea of the name from the novel. Because I guess she's quite a burden of a character, perhaps.
Yeah. Yeah. Sophie Laguna. Sophie's the author of over 20 books for children and young adults. Sophie's books for young people have won and been shortlisted for numerous awards. She's also the author of several acclaimed novels for adults, including the Miles Franklin Award-winning The Eye of the Sheep. Her most recent children's book is The Song of Lewis Carmichael. And a less well-known, perhaps, fact about Sophie is that before becoming an author, she was an actor, appearing in shows such as Blue Heelers, A Country Practice, Rafferty's Rules. Did you have a favourite show?
You mean to watch or to be in?
To be in, yeah.
To be in? No, not really. They were pretty challenging to be in because you weren't in, I was never in them for very long. So you sort of have to jump in and manage that role and out again.
Yeah. And Leigh Hobbs. So Leigh Hobbs is well known as a writer and illustrator of over 20 humorous children's books, including the much loved characters of Old Tom, Horrible Harriet, Fiona the Pig, Mr. Badger and Mr. Chicken. Leigh was the Australian Children's Laureate for 2016 to 17, and in 2019 he was featured by Australia Post in their Australian Legends of Children's Literature stamp series. His most recent books are Mr. Chicken All Over Australia and the upcoming Horrible Harriet and the Terrible Tantrum. And a lesser-known fact about Leigh is that his first job as a young artist was at Sydney's Luna Park, where he created 2 giant figures called Larry and Lizzie Luna, which I think are now held in the Powerhouse Museum in Sydney. Is that right, Leigh?
Yes.
Have you visited them lately? Or?
No. I've been there for years. It's a tough job, so I didn't want to revisit it.
Right, yeah. So as you can see, we've got 3 authors here of exceptional talent and experience ready to share their wisdom with you. So I want to start off by asking a question to all 3 of you. I'll just ask you the same question individually. You've all written so many wonderful books for children. What is it that keeps you coming back to children's writing? What do you enjoy about it? Maybe I'll go to you with that, Sophie, first. What keeps you coming back to writing children's books?
Well, firstly, I have to say I don't think of writing for the audience or for the reader. So I'm not, when you say what brings me back to writing for children, I don't know that when I'm engaged in the story, I'm writing for the story, as odd as that might sound. I'm not aware of who might read it. I'm immersed in the thing. The thing is asking to be written. And of course, marketplace and publishing houses decide its readers, and I'm not so lost in the story. I'm not aware of that, but it's not that I'm drawn back to my readers. Certain characters seem to have stories to tell, and they happen to be often young. That's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in characters who face various struggles, and the world will decide who is the best reader. And I keep having, there are always more.
Yeah, that's interesting. And in the books that you have written for children, have you found that they're a different type of audience than an adult? Do you think they read books differently, or
the readers?
Yes, the readers.
I mean, the readers are young. Do they read books differently? I remember when I was young and I would read, it was more impacting. It was a much more intense sensory experience. Would you agree, Ursula and Leigh, when you read as a child, it was as if you were quite overcome sometimes when you were affected by a particular book or pictures. It was intoxicating. It was really powerful experience. And I watch my kids now and I forget sometimes they'll see something for the first time. Their response is so much more sensitized. And that's what it must be to be 10 or to be 5. It's very intense. There are fewer defenses between you and what is in the manuscript, what is in the story, or what is in the image. More powerful, impacting, formative. And so I suspect I don't think about it though. I really don't think about it. I really don't. And I hope this doesn't sound selfish. It's not that. I don't think about the reader. I don't think about them after or before or during. I'm sorry to say, because I'm preoccupied with characters and story and language and the work. I don't think about. It's lovely, of course, to receive a heartfelt email, of course, but that feels like an entirely separate thing to the act of creation. They've got nothing to do, for me, very little to do with each other. I'm relieved to know the thing has met my own satisfaction. That's an awkward way of trying to articulate. I know if I'm pleased and if the editors or the other people bringing their expertise to the work, if we are pleased, then and my work is done, and then it will be time. My attention will turn to something else. And so I'm not then. I want to know. Of course, I like to know all is well with the book out there. But that's about it. I hope that doesn't make me sound like a terrible person.
No,
I haven't got enough. I wouldn't have enough time to be with the world of the book after it's been published. Do you feel that way, Leigh and Ursula? Or are you familiar? Does that resonate with you, or you think no, that's not me? Or
no, elements of it do.
So, Leigh, while we've got you there, what keeps you coming back to writing for children?
Well, a little bit like Ursula, I'm not really interested in children's books at all. I don't go to bed and read a book about a kid's book, and I didn't as a child. I liked Noddy and those, but I liked the pictures. Even as a kid, the books that I read were about history, particularly England, and biographies, and they're my passions, and architecture and art. And I write and do the drawings in an adult voice, but what I do love, what I think is wonderful about kids is that they have an innate sense of fun, and they're not closed off at all. And the adults that get books too, that's the element that's kept alive in them too, I think. I don't want to sound pretentious, but I'm not. If someone said you have to write a children's book in a cutesy pop, I wouldn't, not interested at all. And I find it fascinating that kids are willing to trust me. And so when I write about Mr. Chicken, he changes size in each page. But if they're engaged, they'll just follow you into a story. And I find that I feel very responsible, and that's what keeps me doing it. The fact that however I pitch it, there will be kids that get it.
Yeah. Do you feel like children are quite an exacting sort of audience?
Oh, God, yes. Yeah. Because they don't know how to play. If they're not interested, they'll put my book down and pick up someone else's. And I reckon you've got the first page to say, all right, this is the world that Leigh Hobbs has mapped out for you, the Mr. Chicken or Old Tom or whatever, and they either get it and continue, or they'll put down.
Thanks, Leigh.
And get a rival.
Yeah. So what about you, Ursula? What keeps you coming back to writing for children?
Well, look, I recognise lots of things that both Sophie and Leigh said that you sort of think, yes, I understand what you're saying there, and I relate to it. I mean, I totally, that absolutely delightful sort of surreal sensibility of children gives you an extraordinary freedom, I think, in what you write. You're not sort of dealing with preconceived ideas about what a book or a story is with very young children. And so in a sense you can be as crazy as you like, and people won't be frowning and saying, what's wrong with this woman? And I certainly have noticed in certain of my books that's been a response from adult readers and not from children readers. I'm a bit worried about you, Ursula. There's something wrong with you. And perhaps I also do recognise what Sophie's saying in the sense that the idea is what grabs you. It's not like you sit down and think, I want to write something for children. But in my case, every single idea I have is for children. I just have a sense of what it is. And so it's driven by the idea. When I'm writing for young children, though, perhaps unlike Sophie, not with the novels. With the novels, I'm sort of writing for myself. But when I'm writing for young children, I almost in a sort of, like envision them sitting in front of me, staring at me.
Wow.
And so I have a kind of pretty strong apprehension that I'm communicating with them.
Wow.
And so it's that it's like a writing for performance.
Yeah.
So it's not like that with novels. With novels, it's sort of much more internal. I mean, funnily enough, in terms of what keeps you coming back, after I've had a morning's writing a novel, I look in the mirror and, all the blood's drained from my face. I look like I've been in this terrible accident. My eyes popping out like seriously ugly. Whereas, like I've had a terrible trauma. Whereas when I'm writing for younger children, it's intense, but it is a light feeling.
Interesting.
So interesting. Yeah.
So it's just a different. And so in a way, with the novels, I'm talking to myself. That's why I'm traumatized. With the things for younger children, I'm talking to them. And I guess they bring me joy of some sort.
That's so interesting. So
it's
different.
So interesting. Yeah, everyone's so different. Yeah.
We read the terrible plot. over. We've read the terrible plot for years.
Good. Glad to hear it. Hope that was it joyful and not traumatic.
Yeah. So I'd like to talk to you, Ursula, about one of your books for younger readers, your most recent one, March of the Ants. And so it's a beautifully illustrated children's book which came out this year. And it's a lovely, hopeful book, an ode to the power of reading. I wonder if you could talk a bit about how you came to write that book.
Well, yes, look, it's illustrated by the wonderful Toby Riddle. Where is his name? There it is. Beautiful anti-illustrations of Toby. Look, it's an unusual book in a sense for me, in that I wrote it for a purpose. What happened was, when I knew I was going to be announced as the Australian Children's Laureate, they're having a ceremony in Canberra in the library, and I was asked to give a 10-minute speech. And I knew most of the people in the audience would be children. And I imagined myself giving the rousing speech about how wonderful reading is. And, you could also very well imagine, this is a little bit like what I was saying before, I suppose, when you're performing, you could also imagine them not listening to my rousing speech, not rudely, but just having no interest. So then I thought, well, look, I'll tell them a story about why I think reading is important. And I knew it had to be pretty short, a couple of 100 words. It would be a bit of a kind of almost Aesop's fable type thing. And so I picked ants. I started off with guinea pigs, actually, in a little boat on the lake, and a big wave would come and all their library books would get wet. And then I just started getting too anxious about the guinea pigs, thinking they might drown or something like that. So I changed it to ants, who are much better survivors than guinea pigs. And look, what was interesting, particularly for me, was, and that's what I always say to children, is that in a way I sort of didn't really know how to explain why I thought reading was important in a speech. I just sort of didn't really know what to say. And yet when I wrote the story, I sort of discovered what to say. So it's a expedition of ants setting off on a very important expedition, and they have to bring all these things that are going to help the expedition. And just very briefly, the context, it was just before COVID. It was February last year, but it was in Canberra. And of course, it's hard to remember back that far, but, Australia had been in the middle of all those terrible bushfires all over the country. And Canberra in particular, I know, had suffered not direct bushfires, but terrible smoke, and everybody had packed their bags and were ready to run any minute now. And I guess I thought, these poor kids, they've been through it. They've had a horrible summer holiday. They're exhausted. They're over it. How do we keep going? And I think that was the thought of the ants. So they all bring these very important things: food, water, a map, tools, and so on. But there's one particular little ant, oops, sorry, my finger is a bit weird, who wants to bring her book. And the chief ant thinks this is a ridiculous, not particularly useful thing to bring. You should bring something useful, like those other extremely useful things. But in the course of the story, it's only 200 words, but they discover, I guess, the meaning of culture, I suppose, in our survival and our lives through the symbol of reading a story.
Would you read
and
us?
So in the end, it got turned. It was a year later. It was delightfully published and illustrated. My plan had been, I would read the story, as I travelled around the country, talking to children, and get them on the stage dressed up as ants and all of that sort of thing. And that didn't really happen. But the beautiful thing that happened was that Book Trail Press and turned it into a book. So. Sorry, did you want me to read?
Yes, could you give us a short little reading? Yeah, thank you.
It's you can see Toby really went to town on all these ants. Very patient illustrator. So the ants were heading off on a very important expedition. Each ant said what they were going to bring. "I'm bringing food," said the first ant. I'm bringing water, said the second. I'm bringing a map, said the third. I'm bringing tools, said the fourth. Excellent, excellent, said the chief ant. You are excellent ants. On and on, right through the ant army, each ant said what they were going to bring, until at last it was the littlest ant's turn. I'm bringing my book, said the littlest ant. A book, said the chief ant, a storybook? What good is that? Find something else, something useful that will help our expedition. And I'll just do one more page. I do love this illustration. But although the littlest ant was little, she was also stubborn. She held her book tightly and shook her head. I'm bringing my book, she said. So.
I love that. I love that quote about the book not being useful, and then obviously it is. It's beautiful.
It turns out to save their lives in a sense, emotion, because their emotions drop and their ability to keep going drop.
Yeah,
but
and I love how
not undermining all the other useful things for which we need. You know, it's not that. It's just that it's not everything.
And it sounds like a very appropriate story for this time, recognizing the power of.
Well, in a way, it turned into a kind of a COVID story. You know, a sort of how do you keep going? We all feel that. How long is this going on for?
Yeah. Yeah, thanks so much, Ursula.
Thank you.
So, Leigh, I'll talk to you a little bit about Horrible Harriet and also Mr. Chicken. So, Harriet, your latest book, which is coming out quite shortly, is Horrible Harriet and the Terrible Tantrum. And
yes,
there she is.
Oh, that's great, Leigh.
Yeah.
Great to see her. Great to see it.
And it's the fourth appearance by Horrible Harriet. And I love Horrible Harriet, as well as all your other characters, because they all have this crazy anarchic sort of energy. Can you tell us about the inspiration for Horrible Harriet?
Well, I was a school teacher for 25 years, so Horrible Harriet's based on an amalgam of girls that, in fact, there are three, I can't name them. One's married to a lawyer now, they're all grown up. But there are three girls in particular who they had no yearning for learning. I think the term is modus operandi was to drive Mr. Hobbs bonkers, and they actually succeeded. So in a way, Horrible Harriet is my revenge. She decides to be a good girl for a change. So what she does is she tries out some good girl smiles. I'll just show you these. There they are. The problem is the thing that thwarts her plans is the Terrible Tantrum, which is a monster in a cage by her bed. So that's what that book is about, her releasing the Terrible Tantrum, and she throws a tantrum. But so that comes out in a week. But Mr. Chicken is the character that even I can't really explain. But kids seem to be sort of besotted by him in a funny way.
Yeah, so Mr. Chicken is a very eccentric chicken. And how many Mr. Chicken books have there been?
Well, I've in the lockdown, I finished a sketchbook for the fifth. So this is Mr. Chicken goes to Mars.
Oh, that's brilliant.
And that came about just one.
That's great.
But, this one because it came about as a direct result from being the laureate, because all these letters in the end papers are real letters from little kids.
Wow.
Asking if I can get Mr. Chicken to come and stay with them. One says, "Dear Mr. Chicken, could Mr. Chicken come and move in with me and my nan?" You know. Anyway. So there you go.
Could you read us a couple of pages from Mr. Chicken?
So I'll read a couple of what this really show and introduce kids to a lot of all the places are real, But of course, it starts off, Mr. Chicken decides to come to Australia, and he goes to a travel agent and meets a little marsupial who is his friend. So I'll just read a couple of pages where I use the alliteration. Mr. Chicken here are the pictures. Mr. Chicken had invitations from Yakandanda to Coolanooka, from Wuk Wuk to Wongalpong, as well as Moonyanuka. One letter from Coffs Harbour said, "Come and see our big banana." So the from Hula to Wagga Wagga, Bairnsdale to Burpengary, Adelaide to Alice Springs, Mr. Chicken said yes to everything and everyone, especially if food was on the agenda. Of course, no one minded much if for a moment Mr. Manners went out the window. It happened at morning tea in Poowong when Mr. Chicken ate a whole pavlova. There's a big prawn in Bella. So in between Poowong and Grong Grong, Mr. Chicken admired the big prawn and stayed for dinner. That's probably enough. But so it's so I enjoyed doing that. That was sort of my payback for being the laureate in a way, because I met so many fantastic teachers and librarians and kids and Indigenous kids at Purnalulu. So it was a gesture in a way.
Yeah, and of course I live just down the road from the Big Prawn, so I particularly loved that Mr. Chicken went there, and that's actually
that's great.
Before lockdown, it was a really thrilling moment.
Yeah, it is.
I gave a bit of a squeal of delight. The librarian driving thought I'd taken a turn, but Right, over to you now.
Yeah. So, Sophie, let's talk a little bit about The Song of Lewis Carmichael, which is a middle grade book. You'd call it middle grade book, and not aimed, but it has been published for 8 to 12-year-olds. Yeah. And it's about a boy who goes to the North Pole in a hot air balloon with a crow, and it's quite a magical sort of a read. Where did your inspiration come for that book?
I don't know what gave it to me, the idea. I know that I had the idea began to form about 5 or 6 years ago. I remember the idea of a boy who was in search of something that was in the ice. Yeah, this idea of polar bears and snow geese. I can't remember when I decided that he would go there in a hot air balloon. I loved the idea for a long time of a talking bird, a bird who could speak. I loved that idea of a very good friend who was a bird who could help and was yours and your good friend alone. And I was thinking this morning, I've never written a story where those sorts of things happen, have I? I think everything is sort of more like real life. But this was real life in the story. Yeah. So I began to have that conversation actually with Mark, my husband, Mark McBride, about 5 years ago, about this boy who would go to this snowy land, and that there would be a baby there, or was there going to be a baby? I don't want to give anything in the story away. And so it formed. And so then I think I must have written some of it, and then I left it for a while and came back to it recently.
So it's been quite a long time in the making.
Yeah, I suppose it has. But I've seen that, hot air balloons have appeared before. You don't know what your interests are, do you?
No.
Your work gives you away. It gives you away. Who would have thought? I didn't really know. I really didn't know. I did discover when I wrote the story, it's so enjoyable to go to the Arctic. So enjoyable to write about walruses and reindeer and Arctic wolves. But I didn't know that I loved those things. I enjoyed it immensely. I loved the balloon ride. But maybe these are sort of symbols that are in all of our unconscious. You think of how many images there are of hot air balloons for children. They're magical, aren't they? They're beautiful and magical. So I'm just another person who wanted to be in one. And by writing this story, I could be. I'd hate to go in one in real life. That would be stressful.
Yeah.
But fiction allows you, doesn't it, that opportunity?
Yeah, you can go anywhere. No cost.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, so Sofie, could you read us a little bit?
Oh yes, I'll read you from chapter 3, when the bird first comes to Matthew. Now Matthew frowned at the blackbird from the park, sitting on his window ledge. Though he remembered the bird, he would never have believed it could speak. Was he hearing things? I do remember, yes, but what? Birds can't talk. Can't they? Said the bird. Well, I'm a bird and I'm talking to you. Yes, but Matthew, look up. The bird hopped around and lifted its beak to the sky. Up there. Matthew leaned out of his window. There in the sky was an enormous balloon, as big as a house, it seemed to Matthew. Its colours were glowing so brightly that it was as if the moon itself was caught inside the balloon. Orange, green, pink, yellow, blue, purple, great glowing vertical stripes. The balloon was attached to a large wicker basket which was sitting on Matthew's roof. Am I dreaming? He said aloud. Who was he asking? Was he asking the bird? No, of course not. The bird gave him a short, sharp peck on the arm. Ouch! You felt that? Said the bird. Yes, yes. Matthew rubbed his arm. You wouldn't feel it in a dream, would you? Matthew didn't know. He was confused. What was happening? You showed me your book today and I thought you might like to go on an adventure, the way your scientist did, your Dr. Juliana Rossi in A Journey to the Farthest North. That's where you want to go? Matthew asked. Don't you? But it's impossible. Why do you say that? The North Pole is 6,922 nautical miles from here. 2 days in the balloon by my calculations, said the bird.
Lovely, thank you. Yeah, it's beautiful. And it's so interesting how you say you start writing and you don't really know who your audience is. I find that fascinating.
Well, it's not that I don't know who the audience is. I will know, if you don't mind me interrupting, Lisa.
No.
It's not that I don't know who they are. Of course, I'll know if the character doesn't go into territory that's not, if it's a young protagonist and the territory that, or the obstacles that the characters faces are suitable for children, I'll know that it will be published for children. But that's not where my attention lies in the creation. My attention will lie in the dialogue and in the balance and in the rhythm of the piece, if that makes sense. So I know it will one day be read, but that just sort of seems like a distant thing I can't really feel. I can't really feel what that is. I just know I suppose the best analogy perhaps is that of if I'd been somebody who composed music, which I'm not musical, but I wonder if you could draw parallels. If you were composing music, a complicated piece of music, you're not, if I was that composer, I wouldn't be thinking children will love the drums here. I can hear where drums will be needed. The story will tell me, does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I'm not writing for the thrill that they'll need this or they'll need that, or the story. It's about the integrity of the story or the piece, and that is sentence by sentence. Each and every sentence will be placing demands on me, and I'll have to meet them.
And do you think, or have you noticed that you return to similar themes across your range of work between your children and adult books and so on?
Yes, I do. I think I do. I think I do. I think if I look, I think it's one of the sort of threads is transgressions where boundaries are transgressed, where adults, without being conscious and unconscious, transgress betray. I think so, because if you look at Matthew's parents in the story, they overstep all the time, don't they?
Yeah.
You know, and they're loving parents. We all overstep at times. I just think that's one of the themes. But no one's ever pointed that out to me or said that to me. But I think I can see it there. Yeah. Even My Yellow Blankie. No one would be able to see it but me. I mean, what fueled that story, my first picture book, was a dear friend who told me that when she was very small, she had a blankie that she loved because of the way that it smelled. And I was interested in that idea, you know, a blankie that you so love because of its smell, even though it's never washed. And the smell is of probably breakfast cereal and, you know, mud and the dog. And then she said, my friend told me the story of how the blankie disappeared. No one explained the blankie's disappearance. And it was all quite harmless. Mum had washed the blankie. But what resonated with me and why the story was written was that it was devastating at 3 years old for those hours when the blankie disappeared, and the child wasn't prepared for it. And that's a betrayal of sorts. I know. I'm not blaming the mother in the story. I'm just siding, I suppose, with the child's experience there. That's what fueled it, and that's what my friend's experience was when she shared the story. She didn't share it as a sweet, fun childhood memory. No, she remembered the anxiety, and that's what put it down on the paper for me. That's what made it hang around. It's funny, isn't it? I don't know if Leigh or you, Ursula, can relate to that. Even though, you know, the reader won't necessarily read a book about the painful read, but I just wonder sometimes the seeds of things can be struggle. So even if the story is full of beauty, it's generated, isn't it interesting? It's partly generated by pain. It's a funny thing to say. Well, even in children's books.
When you look at you know, when children ask, "Oh, where'd you get the idea for that?" or something like that, and you know, it's like analysing your dreams.
Yeah,
you know,
so true.
You actually don't know.
So true.
But after the event, you know, and in a way, as you said, Sophie, you reveal yourself. So in a way, you almost don't want to look into it.
Exactly, and nor should you have to. And you only ever have to if you ask. I mean, But
you have an instinct that there's all sorts of stuff where it comes from.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're right. And it is generated by all things at once, isn't it? So I spoke about generated by pain, but it is also generated by beauty, by the animals, and by beauty. But
thank you. It's so interesting where it all comes from, and you wouldn't know, would you, until you really
wouldn't. You really wouldn't. And even then, you can find some words, but they'll only be that. You don't really know. And you know, I wonder how. It's not the most important thing, is it, where it comes from?
Yeah. Leigh, I just wanted to ask you, and I'll ask you too, Sophie and Ursula, when you write a story, you know, your character has to have a problem. What sort of problems do your characters have?
Well, I don't think of them as story. All my books really are character studies, and like there's a lot I can't do, but what I can do is imbue, I think, the character with the risk of sounding pretentious. I'll start again from the other way. All my books are character studies, and I don't set out to write. It never occurred to me to write about an issue. And even though I use the term decry the fact that they're not issues based, because I think I'm fair income about the characters, they inevitably come from like a real place. So, you know, looking back, there are stories and things, but they come out innately. I work very closely with Erica Wagner. Well, we've worked together now 30 years. And so this new sketchbook of I had no idea what the story would be about, but it was prompted, as I say, by that one drawing. But this is what I've done. Every day I get up and do different words and things. sketches.
Wow.
I don't know whether it's show. But what happens is that bit by bit the story comes out, you see?
Wow.
Right.
And there's a sort of a strange logic that, but it's sort of not innate, what's the word, unconscious.
Yeah.
So I can't really give a very intelligent answer to the question.
Yeah.
But no, that's right.
Yeah.
Playing around with your ideas until something emerges, like putting pieces of a jigsaw on a table.
What I've learned is that even after doing 23 books, the same problems arise. I have this moment like that first drawing of absolute inspiration and just do tons of drawings. Then it ends up difficult. Then then it ends up hard slog. The difference between now and 20 years ago is that I know that that's a process and I can trust it now. But I apologise, I can't give a succinct answer to your question, which now I completely forget.
It looks so much fun, Leigh, that book. It looks so much fun. It looks so enjoyable.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
well,
it looks
he's going to Mars. I can't even leave Williamstown. You know, we're in lockdown.
So good he's going to Mars.
I think with ideas, you have an intuition, don't you? As you're saying, that first inspiration, you see something or you hear something, you just have this intuition that you could write a lot about that. You know, whereas for another person, it won't be. It'll mean nothing to them. But you don't know what you could write about it, but you just have there's a lot going on there. I could do that.
That's the link between the four of us. We're all doing is that you have to trust that something that it's the signal, and also it's the signal too that tells you whether you're on the right track. And if you write for an audience, or you show your book around, or you write to win a prize, you're making yourself very vulnerable. The further you stray away from your own instinct, I think the more convoluted that initial rich idea gets. I must write that down.
Yes, that's a great
just remembering something that I heard at a talk that David Malouf gave once. Somebody was asking about, what do you do about writer's block? And first he said, oh, well, I just put it in a drawer and look at it 20 years later. And I thought, wow, that's a very confident writer. But then the other thing he said was,
Ursula?
What was that?
A very confident writer.
Yes. To put something away for 20 years, because I just think I'd be dead, you know. But otherwise, he said he goes to the very first page he wrote, and all the answers, all the secrets.
Wow.
And actually, I think there's a lot of truth in that, because that's just the very first thing that you thought of.
That's good.
And if you just look at it again, that's where it is. And as you say, Leigh, you might have gone off on the wrong track, or there's this influence or that influence or whatever, but you go back to that first impulse, that first intuition, and you'll find it there. So that's a bit like what I guess we're all saying.
That's really good. That's really good. I'm going to use that.
Tell you what.
That won't leave me. That won't be leaving me.
I'm coming away from this full of good advice.
Ursula, in your books, what sort of problems do your characters have to overcome? Is there something you keep returning to, or
look? I'm sure there is. I know somebody said to me quite early on in the piece. So I'm, over 20 years ago, perhaps 25 years ago, and I'd published half a dozen books, and they said, "Oh, all your books are set up as mysteries. They're not strictly speaking mysteries, but that's how they work." And I suppose that's sort of, and they're often mysteries that are not resolved. So I guess that's something to do with, just the puzzle of life and kind of wrestling with the essential mystery of everything. So I guess that's probably is a kind of a theme. I think probably, look, I mean, that's a theme of a great many stories in the world. So that's not unique to me, but that it's, I do rather like things that aren't explained. So I guess for me, the challenge with children's books is to give that the notion of the sense of an ending. The sense that when you finish the book, that it just doesn't sort of peter out into a mystery that leaves you feeling anxious, but you okay, there's a sort of almost an illusion of a solution.
Yeah.
But then I guess what you hope for, these are the sorts of books I like, that when you put the book down, you think, what was that about? I'm not really quite sure. Like that's certainly the case in the picture books as well as the novels, that you create a resolution, you that impulse that we all have as readers to go through those emotions that satisfy us emotionally when we read something, and yet a lingering, fuzzy, smoky question mark that perhaps will make you either think about it again or go back to it and read it again, and you still won't be any the wiser, including the author.
That's good. That's really good.
Terrific point, because I think a lot of people I think it's a far more, they don't need all the information, because in a way I write as if the books are radio plays, so that the text is in the adult voice, the picture is in the kid's voice, and the text never says what the picture does. And there's another meaning which the kids interpret. They put the two things together. If something to an adult doesn't make sense in the book, a kid will invent their own. Mr. Chicken lands in London in a balloon. A kid will make up where the balloon came from, whereas some adults fret, but that doesn't make sense.
They do.
He doesn't look like a chicken. He's Mr. Chicken, and that's his appearance. And I love the fact that kids will just invent their kids' logic. That's what it is.
Yeah, thank you. So we've got some fabulous questions lined up here from our audience. So let's have a look and see. So Judy Campbell says, do you fully plot your stories from commencement, or do you let them flow organically and edit later? Who'd like to tackle that question first? Leigh.
I have a suspicion we might all be of the non-plotting variety. I've just got
yes, I am. Hands up.
Which is a very messy way to write, and I mean, that is me, and frustrating. It seems to me if you can't plot, you just can't. Some people seem to have a very theoretic mind and they can work it out. Whereas I've just never been able to do it, even though I've tried, because you can see it would be infinitely more efficient as a writing process.
I'm a plotter. I plot. I plot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I was wrong. So the way you're talking, it felt to me like you.
I know. See, well, that's right.
Right.
No,
congratulations. I think that's great.
No, I just even though if you saw the look of what that plot looked like, it would look messy. I'm plotting. I try and find a plot. I mean, I'm working quickly as I can to find a plot. Yeah, as in the events of the story. Yeah, like as in, and so it's organic, as in it's just sort of a natural part of how I work. So I might have the idea, the boy who goes to the ice, and I literally will, say I had that conversation with Mark, I would have said, so what can he? So let's say he goes there and he can't find his baby brother, whatever the story is. And then I'll go, okay, no, that's right. He goes to the wolves because he thinks he hears a cry and he's following that. But then what? Yeah, like that. And I'll do that for the first. So I'll have the initial idea, whatever took my attention, or, the love of this character, or whatever it is. And then I'll try very quickly. I'm a bit insecure and anxious until I have that, because if I don't have that, I could lose the whole thing. I could lose the whole thing at any moment. It won't happen. And it won't happen. It'll be lost, and my life will fall apart, and, all will fail. And so it's always sort of a slight feeling of not knife edge, but there's a slight knife edge feeling to life. Yeah, that's not a great way. And they're not great words for it, but it's a little bit an anxiety around it, which probably isn't a bad thing if you think about it. Maybe that helps me. Yeah, because I want to know what's going to happen. And then I can work within the structure of knowing what is going to happen. And that's much more restful and playful. And, yeah, and so I will get the steps down. Yeah, and that might change a little bit. It might change a little bit as I'll go, oh, I could flag it. I could, in the start, I could have the snow geese flying past in the start. So then when I bring them back, yeah, but no radical changes. Yeah. Most of the work's done that work's done pretty quickly. And when it's not done quickly, yeah, I don't trust it. I get worried. I feel insecure and, about the work. Yeah. Yeah.
And you're more of an organic process, Leigh, would you say? Oh,
Let's take the next question, if you want.
So next question from Jan Braham. Sorry, I probably haven't pronounced that right. Can you please offer your number one tip for emerging authors about becoming published?
Gosh. Well, you know what? Something I always say to my children about the creative life is that if you keep creating, something will happen. And it may not be what you planned or what you wished for or what you even ever thought of. But if you keep creating, you will have a creation. Something will happen. And so I suppose about getting published, I think it's having the creation in front of you that you've made, and that will lead you on a path, if you know what I mean. The important thing is to keep creating. If you stop, then nothing will happen. If you stop, absolutely nothing will happen. So, and you can't really control it. So in many ways, so you just have to keep creating. Sorry, Leigh, you.
No, you're right. And I think too, you have to just keep going. Old Tom was rejected by 5 different publishers, you know. The rejection letters in that. So you just have to get cracking and be strong enough to take the knocks too. I mean, some people are lucky in, you know, first book and all that sort of stuff. But I think just what Ursula says, you know, just keep doing it, both illustration or art and the writing.
Do you have anything to add about that, Sophie, in terms of becoming published as an emerging author?
Keep doing it is the most important one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Keep practicing. Keep practicing. Find people to support what you're doing. That can be helpful in the early stages. People who you might be able to share it with, people who might encourage you. Some sort of community in the early stages, I think.
And another question from Carol Ann Goldsmith. How much money do you make from each children's book on average? And have any of you published online via Amazon? And do you also publish audio versions of your books? Does anyone want to talk about money, or is that?
Well, I don't know whether it's right. I've got no complaints about my advance from Allen and Unwin. I haven't.
Put it on the record.
I've never even got an honour book from the CBC, let alone I haven't won. So I can't rely on high sales, you know, like I've never had a huge sort of hit. But I've never published online, but the Allen and Unwin bring out audio. I think they do, although someone has audio books. I don't know who they are. So I think it varies. And I think I don't know anything about the sales thing. Someone else to answer that, because I don't know how discreet you've got to be.
Yeah. Do you have any comment on that, Sophie or Ursula?
Oh gosh, it's probably too tricky to answer, isn't it? Because every book is so different, and no, it's too complicated to try and answer. You make a living in all different things come together. Your school appearances, the times you get an advance. You might have some success in applying for a grant one time. and you're resourceful and you manage. Some years are better than others. Some books are better than others.
What's my yellow blankie? That sold like 23 million copies, didn't it?
It did. No, and so I used to go into schools and perform that book. I performed that book to a lot of schools. I don't know that it made any difference at all to the sale of the book, but it was fun. I suppose it was fun.
So we've got 5 minutes left, so maybe just one more question, and then we might have to wrap it up. Do you have a favourite character of yours that you feel quite protective of? Anyone?
With me, it's probably old Tom.
Yeah, why old Tom?
Well, look, there's a little bit of me in all the characters, and old Tom, I've realised now that really it's about my relationship with my mother. You know, Angela is bent on socialising old Tom, who really is a 7-year-old kid. You know, I think we all feel connected to our characters because we've given birth to them.
Well, at the moment, this one, Hercules Quick, that's illustrated by Andrew Joyner, he's doing odd jobs for 10 cents. And a lot of these odd jobs, they're pretty tough. You know, his spirits, he gets daunted, but he keeps on going back for more as he's saving up in his, tragic quest to buy a box of magic tricks. So I'm very fond of him at the moment. Just that a bit like what we were just saying before, you just got to keep on going. He's just got to keep on doing his little jobs and saving up his 10 pieces, and something will happen in the end.
That's really all there is to do, isn't there? Keep going. That's it. And I like how you say something will happen. Something will happen. Something will happen. I mean, we don't know what it is, but we know it will happen.
But could I just add, for the people that are watching and are keen to be involved, often say we're at a festival and we're on the stage, people think, we've got books published and we've been the laureate or we've done this and Sophie's won all these. But really, everyone, whether they appear successful or not, goes through the same, ups and downs and disappointments, and very few people that I've met have gone from nothing to suddenly they're on a stage, and it is tough, and it is worth working hard and keeping going.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, I think we might just have to wrap it up, though I know we could go on for another hour. It's been amazing. So much wisdom. I'm going to have to rewatch it and take some notes. Thank you so much. It's been great. And I've got a few things to say at the end here. So particular thanks to Leigh Hobbs, Ursula Dubusaski and Sophie Laguna for sharing so much of their creative process and writing life. I've loved hearing that. And I also want to thank the audience. I'm sorry we didn't get to all your questions there, but thank you so much for being here and asking questions. And if you want to purchase books, I'm sure you will, Dymocks Albury is delivering free to Albury residents and is offering 25% off during lockdown. So they're a good port of call. And I also want to let you know that there's 3 more conversations coming up today that you might be interested in. I'm going to be back on here in half an hour to talk about writing humour with Judy Horacek, Rick Morton and Fiona Scott Norman. Following that, historical frictions with Anita Heiss, Jock Sarong, Dorothy Simmons and Jason Steger. And finally, seismic shifts, a conversation traversing personal, cultural and planetary change with Rick Morton, Delia Falconer and Ailsa Piper. And you can book tickets for these sessions on the Right Around the Murray website. So thank you all so much for being here, and thank you to our speakers.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Leigh and Ursula.
Bye.
Bye.